This is for writers who are mainly for those of us writing fiction, because we're going to talk today about developing active characters. And we want to, how do we get characters in our story that people really care about? Because that's how they'll keep reading the story. So first of all, if you haven't watched last week's, I encourage you to go back and watch the presentation I did last week, because it goes through that idea of sort of the mindset of a writer. It was very important for me to come down and be able to say, I am a writer. It's not all I do. I don't make a living from writing, but part of who I am is writing. I love it. I think through my words and through putting them down. And so that's part of who I am. I love sitting at the screen and getting my thoughts down. I am also a mother and a grandmother, and there's actually more babies than when this picture is taken. We have 7 grandbabies now. So but that gives me lots and lots of personalities and experiences from which to write. For myself, this is my website. If you want to check it out, I write on nonfiction stuff on there, mainly to parents, mainly to moms, on parenting and on Christian parenting. I have 2 books that I have self-published. They're both available on Amazon or on my website. And this is that idea of having ideas in our head and keep writing them until we're ready to put them out into the world. And I want to tell you that if you're doing that, this is the secret. You never actually feel done. You just have to say, this is done for now, and put it out into the world, because you can always go back and do another edition. But if you don't ever publish it, it's just going to stay with you. And so these are the things that so far I've been brave enough to publish. So today we're going to talk about developing active character. The books I've written before are nonfiction, but I do have a novel that I've been writing for several years, got it all the way to where I thought it was completed, and now I'm doing some major rewrites and reordering, which is an exciting and fun and harrowing experience, like most of writing. But this is where I have really studied, how do I develop active characters? If you're going to put people in a story, you want those who are reading the story to care about those characters. Stories matter because they're how we examine our world. I mean, think about that Jesus in the New Testament taught through parables. He told truths through stories. We read stories, fiction, even though we know they're not an actual thing that happened, but we can still learn through the way people in the story act and react. We can learn what to do and not to do. We can identify our own feelings and our own experiences. And those are all the power of story. It's a very, very powerful medium, but we want to engage people in our message, and that happens through characters. We have characters that survive difficulty. We have characters that go on major quests. We have characters that overcome hardships, that have obstacles, and that manage to get through anyway. And all of those can inspire us. And characters are people. Stories about a wooden flat thing do not ignite people, but stories about people will ignite the readers to stick with you. All right, so we're going to talk about, within a story, we have 9 types of characters. And once you kind of start looking for these, you will see them all around you. Like if you watch a movie, you're going to see, oh, this is who that character is, and this is who that character is. So let's go through some of these. So the protagonist is your major hero, can be male or female, but they're the ones that have the job to do. They have the quest to go on. They have somebody they've got to rescue. They have something that's going to happen. They're the protagonist, or the one moving the story ahead. There is usually a deuteragonist, which just means duo, means 2. It's like the best supporting actress, right, or actor. So they're the ones that are along with the protagonist. They're helping, or they are maybe a major character in the story, but they're not the driving character of the story. In order for there to be anything exciting, in the story, we have to have conflict. And so that comes from the antagonist. And that is somebody that you really want to work on to develop. They need to have the same levels of personality, the same level of excitement in what they're doing as you have with your protagonist. There's usually a love interest because we all just love the love story. And so that's fun because we see how relationships are affected by what is happening in the story. We have a mentor often. The mentor could be the person that is helping the protagonist along, helping to learn the lesson that he or she has to learn in order to get to the end of the story. And we have usually somebody being a narrator, because you have to it has to be what's happening through the character's eyes. But if we put a character in the story that can kind of comment on what's going on, that really helps with understanding. Now, the narrator could be the mentor, could be the deuteragonist, could be the love interest, but that is somebody that often is in your story. And then we have secondary characters. Those are ones that are maybe a level down. We want them to have personality. We want them to show up with their own little quirks and things, but they're not going to change the story one way or the other. Layer down from that is tertiary characters. That might be like the boss or the person they keep running into, the neighbor, that sort of thing. And then you can have your story filled with flat characters, because you have to have the population around that you're not going to necessarily describe. But the only ones you want to be flat, the only ones you want to be sort of the wallpaper in the background, are those that you're not having direct conversations with one of these other characters. They're the milling crowd in the background, but if they are going to engage in the story, then you want to give them more character. All right, so how are we going to reveal the character? When I was introduced to the series Anne of Green Gables, I never knew about the books. And so I got introduced by the wonderful TV series all those years ago. And I loved it. I loved the story and loved Anne and Marilla and all of the things that were going on with them. And then eventually I said, okay, I've watched all the movies. I've got to go back and read the books. And when I read the books, I found that it was a very different Anne in my mind, even a very different Marilla in my mind, because Ella Montgomery did such a great job of painting the picture of the characters through the descriptions that she gave, through the way they reacted with their situations around them, that I ended up with a totally different mental picture. And that's what we're doing when we reveal character. We are painting a picture in our readers' minds that they can see the person that is going through the story, the problems the story is putting in the way, and the solutions that come out. So what do they look like? We want to paint the picture. It's both what they look like in their physical characteristics, in their personalities, and all those things. And we'll get into these more detail as we go through. But start thinking and maybe jot down on your paper, what are things that you notice about people? What are the things that to you stand out that reveal who a person is? People watching is a great exercise to do to start developing your ability to describe and create a character with a heartbeat, because everybody is different. And it's the fun is that there's such variety, and we get to put that in our stories. So this is a quote by Fitzgerald. That does not say that. Okay, it's Fitzgerald. So begin with an individual, and before you know it, you've created a type. Begin with a type, and before you know it, you've created nothing. And what that means, if you begin with saying, I have a hero. I have a hero that's going to go into the story, that's going to have a problem, is going to save the day. Then that becomes a very flat kind of person. But if you start with Joe, who is going to have these problems, who is going to try and work very hard to get to a place of helping his family survive the zombie apocalypse, then you have an individual that becomes the character of the hero. But you've got to start with a person and not the role. Okay, so what are the characteristics that our characters need to have? So when you think about a person, and I gave you, I believe, no, I didn't give you this list. So you might want to jot some of these things down. So every person is going to have a family situation. That doesn't mean they have to be married. It just means everybody came from somebody. What was their family situation? Did they come from a divorced family or from a stable family? Or maybe they were orphaned, or maybe one of their parents died. Maybe, you know, all of those backgrounds of family. So you have the family that is the background, that affects who they are, and the family that they have now. What's their job? How do they pay the bills? Can they pay the bills? Can they eat? Do they have lots of money or just barely enough to get by? Do they have their dream job or do they hate their job? What about their education? Did they struggle in school? Maybe they have a doctorate, but they have struggled in school all the way through to get there. That's very different from the person who was just brilliant and breezed through school, or the person who's very, very smart but never had the money to go to school. So all of those things, what's their education? And what are the details of that education? What about their own home that they live in now? What's their situation? Are they single? Do they have roommates? Do they like their roommates? Are they very neat and their roommate's a mess? Or maybe they're a mess and it drives their neat roommate crazy? What's their health like? What do they struggle with? Maybe you have a hero that through the whole story has got to run and get from one place to the other, but he's got asthma. And every time he runs, he's got to stop and inhale and use his inhaler. I mean, think about the different layers of health and what that can do. Maybe they have something that is a learning disability, or maybe they have a disease they're dealing with. Maybe they have eczema and they're always sort of self-conscious about it. What are those things? Okay, so I give you that first rather than the physical, because I think it's easy to always start with the physical. But in reality, most of our personality and who we are don't come from our physical. It comes from those other parts of our lives. It comes from our family. It comes from how we were brought up. It comes from if we struggle for money or we have a lot of money. All of those are very informative of personality. But then, of course, we want to have our physical description of our characters. Now, I want to encourage you for every character you have, if you're writing a story, that you sit down and you think through these things, not as you're writing so much, but on a separate piece of paper. Because you don't want to just spew out all the details of a character as you introduce them on the page, but you need to know all these details. What's their nationality? What is their coloring? What kind of hair do they have? Is it straight or curly? Is it dark or light or somewhere in between? What's their height, their weight? And even when you have, you know, you could say they're really tall, but are they an athletic tall, that physicality? Are they athletic or are they sort of awkward? Are they short and they sort of just kind of go into themselves? Or are they short but very strong and sort of exude this personality, even though they're diminutive in size? How old are they? And how does that relate to the age around them? And how does that affect what they're doing? What's their voice like? Is it low or high or squeaky or soft or loud? Do they always have to be shushed every time they're talking? Or is somebody going, what? What did you say? Because if you think about how people are, it's all very, very different. Okay, so this is what we do not want. We don't want flat characters that just have a little bit of wallpaper put on top of them and have a tiny bit of personality. We also don't want this, maybe ones we've developed a little more, but have no heartbeat, that have no life in them. We're not developing mannequins. We're not developing paper dolls. We want to develop people. Okay. So characters with depth. If we have characters with depth, we can have somebody we love. You know, we love people that have little personality quips, that have weaknesses, that have the things they struggle with. One of the things that has taken the Marvel movies and the superheroes have made them so popular is that every superhero also has faults. They also have little quirks. They have things that they're good at, really, really, really good at, but they also have things that they're not good at. And because of that, they're more lovable. We can identify with them more, and that is one of the reasons that they are so very popular. So we want to develop all of our characters, no matter what kind of story we have. We want to have them have depth. And to have depth, they have to have personality, and they have to have things they're good at and things they're bad at. So we want to keep going with our characters. A genuine creation should have character as well as be one. Should have central heating, so to say, and not just exterior lighting. So it's not just, we don't just make the facade of brunette, 5'6", muscular, fast, and then put a little light on them like, oh, and they like fashion. No, we want to know what's the inside. What is the inside of them? What are their motivations? What do they care about? What do they hate? Do they love vegetables or they avoid them with all the power of a 2-year-old? What are they and who are they? That's what we want to know. Look at these people in comparison to those flat characters or those mannequins. Look in their faces. Can't you see a story there? You could write a story about them, of things they've experienced in the past, of hopes they have for the future, of regrets, of things they're proud of things they're ashamed of. Because real people have real stories and lots going on. You want your characters to exude personality, just like these pictures exude personality. It's just that we're doing it with words as authors. When writing a novel, a writer should create living people, not characters. A character is just a caricature. We don't want to just have this formulaic little automaton that acts like all the heroes act, and then the bad guy that acts like all the bad guys act, and then the sidekick that acts like all the sidekicks act. We want them to have this plethora of personality traits that they bring to the table that affects the conversations that they have on the page. Okay, so I'm going to give you some help now of some different places that you can go to find out information that will help you develop your characters. Because the real strength of developing characters is to keep asking questions. So this comes from a website called helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. This lady's name is K.M. Weiland. She has a podcast of the same name. I really enjoy her podcast. Really, it's just she reads her blog post out loud, which is great because I don't have time to read blog posts as much as I have time to listen to them. And she's always all kinds of writing information and how to develop. She has a lot of books that she has on how to organize your book, how to outline your book, how the different character arcs that go, all those kinds of things. I have found her information very helpful. This is a chart. And if you just took this chart and answered these questions about every one of your characters, it'd be a long way towards developing well-rounded characters. So think of the background. You know, we talked about that. What's their family like? Well, where does he live? What does he do? What does he know? That's a very good question. Like, what are the things that he already's got going on in his brain? Well, what are the missing pieces of information that will affect the story? His outlook, would he describe himself? Is he positive or negative? What does he believe in? What haunts him? What are the failures that he just can't shake that are in the back of his mind? Or the hurts or the pains that have happened in his past? Okay, this is physical appearance, same thing we just talked about, height, weight, posture. Does he slump? Does he stand up? Does he walk in, you know, some people walk in the room and just have kind of this physical presence in the room. And some people walk in and you don't even realize they're there. What is the physical appearance? Eyes, nose, mouth, hair, skin. What kind of clothes do they wear? Is your character one that cares about fashion or doesn't? Do the clothes say that he's wealthy or poor? What about characteristics? What is his greatest strength? And that doesn't mean physical strength. What's the thing that he or she does that is what everybody depends upon? And what's the greatest weakness? What's going to be the thing that trips him up? What's going to be the thing that says, uh-oh, I didn't mean to do that. I keep failing there in the same place every time. And what's his greatest fear? That's a great question to ask of your character. Think about interest. What about their favorite movie or book or song? Now, you know, if you're writing something historical, you might be like, I don't really know. But you can think about their personality. Say, if this historical person I wrote about in the time of Christ, Israel in the time of Christ, okay, I don't know what the music was, but I could think personality-wise, if those characters came to now, what would be their favorite song? What would be their favorite movie? What's the political leaning? What's the best gift that this character could receive? What would they love the most? Some people don't really care about gifts. Some love them. Some people just want all the gifts. Some people don't really want them unless they're very, very meaningful. So think about what that reveals a lot about personality. What's the best gift? Expressions and attitudes. What makes him laugh? How does he act when he's angry? What's the best way to cheer him up? All of these are great questions. You will find this chart on the website and you can save it to your computer or print it off, so that all of these questions are great ways to examine your character and realize that all of your character, you know, we listed all those different kinds of character. We're not just talking about our hero here. We're also talking about those secondary and tertiary characters and the antagonist and the mentor. All of those characters need to have these things answered. So think about also personality types. And there's all kinds of things on the web about using personality types in writing your characters. But these are the things that I found that I really liked. The two main personality types that I have found the most helpful are the Myers-Briggs. It comes down to 16 personalities types, and then the Enneagram, which is 9 basic personality types. And if you look at this, this is a chart, and I will give you the website that I got this from. So you don't have to write anything down. You can go to this website. And these are the different kinds of personalities that they developed for Myers-Briggs. I just was listening to Kay Weiland had a podcast recently on using Myers-Briggs in your characters. But if you have this kind of person, they're going to react differently. An extrovert versus an introvert. Somebody that is going to think about it internally or going to process externally. All of those matter. The Enneagram looks like this. There's 9 basic personality types, and you want to know what personality type is your character. Both these websites looked at using personality types for character. You should have this in the notes if you printed them off. If you didn't print them off, you'll be able to get these later, but that way you can go and find them. If you go and find that maybe the link is broken or whatever, just Google personalities, characters, writing, and then Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, and you will have more articles than you can shake a stick at. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is sort of one of those rabbit holes we can get sucked down. And it's so much fun figuring out all the personality things for all of our characters that we never write our story. I mean, I'm not saying that like from personal experience or anything, but it is possible for that to happen. So this is always in the idea of helping us develop well-rounded characters. But sometimes we just need to get our characters in the story and start writing, and then come back and refer to this as we need it. And that's the step that we put in next. If you're having trouble deciding who your character is, you kind of know, and you know what they need to do, but you're having trouble quite figuring out their personality, put them in a scene. It doesn't have to ever wind up in your book. Put them in the middle of a problem and start writing. Just free flow writing of them interacting with someone else, and see what personality bubbles up in your character. And if you feel like I have no idea, then you're going to want to ask more questions about that character. But sometimes we've got to stick them in the story and start having problems show up, and we're going to discover more and more about our characters. Okay. For fiction to be strong, it must include both engaging story and intriguing people. So it's easy when we're thinking about our story to get all our situations rolling, but we want both incredible story and incredible people. And it's the incredible people that drive the incredible story. If we have a great storyline and this fantastic thing that's going to happen, if we don't have people that can be identified with, then it's going to be very difficult for us to care about the story. We've got to have both. If you're really having trouble figuring out who your character is, this is a great resource. Now, it's very much potential rabbit hole that I just talked about because it's so long. But if you go on this website to this link, I put it in your notes, you can sign up, give them your email, and you can get this download. And it's several pages long of an entire questionnaire that you could take your character through. You are not, if you're a rule follower and have a hard time with getting a questionnaire without answering every single question, I will tell you this might not be your most time productive resource. But it's a great place if you just are going, I don't even know what questions to ask my character. This is a great place to go because there's so many things to ask, and there's room to write down. You could just keep running it off and have it for as many characters as you want to have. And there are other character questionnaires online. I'll tell you that right now. So there are lots of resources out there. This is one that I have found very thorough and so therefore helpful, and also takes time. So we are always balancing that as we write in the seams of our life. How do we develop our characters and really get to know them and also actually write about them? And that is a challenge. If you think you're the only one struggling to do both things, you are not. Okay, so the next thing, character arc. As we are developing our characters, the way we're really, really, really gonna figure out who they are is mess up their lives. And that's where intriguing story comes from. It's from the problems that they interact with and as things happen. Because a story is a journey. We're not telling our character's life story. We're telling our character's journey through a problem towards a solution. That is what story is. And so you want to know all the background of the character, but that may only show up in little peppered details throughout different chapters. But you've got to put them in the middle of your story in order for them to get going and for all of this stuff you figured out about them to show up. If there is no possibility for a change in a character, we have no interest in him. So when we have our character all figured out through all these questionnaires, through figuring out their personality and their background and their weakness and their strength and their fears, we need to take them on a journey that they will change in some way. Not in their core character of who they are, but maybe that great fear they're going to have to face. Maybe their great strength that they've always depended on is going to fail them in their story. And so they're going to have to drum up strength from somewhere else. Maybe they're going to have to depend on more people because while they thought they could do everything, they couldn't. They have to go. Even the protagonist, who is the guy that we're rooting for, the girl that's going to save the day, if all she does is save the day, but with no problem, it's not very exciting. And it doesn't give us hope, because what gives us hope is to see someone who's brave enough to take on the quest, encounter problems, falter, fail, be faced with their own internal issues, and yet persevere through to get to the other side. This is Woody. He gets going. He all of a sudden has his world sort of messed up. He panics and then falls into the depths of despair because everything gets ruined. Now what's going to happen? And his happy little world has changed. He has to figure something out. He finally determines that there is a solution. He works very, very hard. And at the moment when he started to work with Buzz, he started to work with the people around him. He doesn't just depend upon himself. He finally rises. There's this great solution, and everybody's happy at the end. But this is a character arc. It changes through the story and through the difficulties that this character that we've developed through all of our background research we're doing. Then we can take that character on a story, and more of them is going to show up as it goes through problems and goes through changes. So what do I do next? We have this character. We know we got to take him on an arc. You've got to create your character. This is where we start. And I really encourage you to create your character outside of writing your story. I have done a little bit of both. Sometimes I kind of get going and discover my character as I'm writing and then go back and fill in details. But you want to have a running list outside of what you're writing about your character. And the reason is that you don't want to dump all the information about your character the moment he or she shows up in the story. You want it to show up as the character interacts with others. If he's always having to look up to people, we get the idea that he's short. If she's always brushing her hair out of her face, we get the idea that her hair is unkempt. You know, we have to create the character and then put them in the story. Then we have to decide what's that arc, what's that journey we're going to take them on. We create the story, the character, we have him outside of this. Now we put him in a journey. And we know these things about them on the outside that are going to inform the journey the character's on. It's okay, it's actually good to know a lot more about our character than shows up in the story. Why? It's just depth. The depth will be hinted at through the story, even if every detail that we know about him doesn't show up as a detail in the story. That's why it's good to take time to develop that character before you put them on the journey. You want to give her a quest. In that journey, there's a goal that they're going for. That also is going to reveal a great deal about their characteristics, what are their character qualities? Do they have a lot of determination? Do they get discouraged easily? That's going to show up on a quest. And then we get to follow along and see what happens. We develop these characters with heartbeats. We put them in the storyline that we have, and then we type and we try to keep up with the things that they're doing, the conversations that they're having. And all of those are going to flow in a much deeper way when we have developed them before we put them into the story. Okay, so if there's no possibility for changing a character, we have no interest in him. Remember that quote. So we're going to take a minute and do a little bit of an exercise. I want you to think of a character that you are writing about in a story. Now, if you're like, well, I'm not really writing a story, that's okay. Think of a character. If you go, I don't really know of a character, that's okay. Think of a movie. Pick a character out of a movie. And we're going to talk through what this character is going to need. If you have a story you're writing, and these are listed on your piece of paper, that if you have the notes printed out, you could go through and just jot down next to them. If not, just jot down on a piece of paper or think in your mind. What are your character's goal, a motivation? What's their purpose? Do they have a fear, a flaw, a history that affects what they're doing? What's their present story that may be very different from their past? What's their personality, interest, a quirk, or a habit, a name, a desire, a love. Okay, I'm going to give you like 2 minutes and just write down a few notes. Okay, how'd y'all do? You want a little more time? Okay, let's go on to the next thing, and you can keep working on that list if you want. Think about what's complex, unique, relatable, where they fail, where they suffer, and what makes them sweat. This is a next level of complexity. What is unique about your character that is different from any other thing, that is different from those around them? Keep filling in that first list if you think of more things, and then add this second list onto it. Okay, and then now let's go into our third list, and we'll take a minute after this to fill it in as well. Okay, so now that we have some of these things, let's find your character's identity. Do they identify themselves as successful or a failure or somebody that hasn't had a chance? What's their identity? What's their perspective? Are they an optimist or are they pessimistic? What type? What language? What attitude? What's their happy place? Where do they get support? What's their gut? What's their gut level thinking? Are they going to run into the burning building? Or are they going to stay away? Are they risk averse, or do they find the thrill of risk? What's their breaking point? What would be the thing that would break them? Is it if their family got hurt? Is it if they lost all their money? What would break them? What about their refuge? Where is the place that they would go to find the security where they could be restored and renewed? And what would they feel gave them glory? Okay, so let's take another minute for some of those questions. Okay. All right, good job, everybody. This is just getting you started. Some of these things will help you decide ways you can reveal this character through a story. If you've ever watched The Incredibles, you will notice I have a lot of, because all those kids, I have a lot of cartoons in my illustrations. But in The Incredibles, the daughter in the first movie is very unhappy. She's unsure about who she is. She doesn't like feeling different. And her hair is always in her face. And she's always kind of hiding behind that. And when she finally gets to a place to decide to engage in the story, to change, her character begins to say, I am going to work on this quest that is in front of me. She puts her hair back. And it's not anything that's said, it's just revealed through the visual. That's a great example of ways that these different things can show up without us specifically naming them. If the fear is to be noticed, if the fear is to show up in your superhero status, then the change is shown when you get your hair out of your face and you decide to engage and you begin running and using your superpowers. And it's not, she doesn't ever say, okay, fine, I think I will be a superhero. It just shows up. But you have to know the history and the past and the fear and what her gut instinct is to then reveal that through the physical attributes that show up. When you're in any writer's classes, the first thing you start hearing is show, don't tell. And this is why you want to know these background things about your character. Because you don't want to tell that my parents got divorced and I've always been afraid that I would get divorced too. You want to say, you want to have the character have this show up in actions, maybe how he reacts to his friend that's getting divorced, maybe how he reacts to his own marriage that's going through struggles, and how those things are there. That history that you figured out from some of these questionnaires that you've done is going to show up in the actions. And those actions are going to reveal the deep background of your character, not spelling it out in a sentence. So you do all of this work before so it can show up as the character engages. Okay, so here's some helpful websites. Writers Helping Writers has some great articles. You know, we're in such a day and age where there's so much free information. It's all online, and there's lots of articles. There's lots of YouTube, all kinds of things that can be very, very helpful. Another one, and this is the website, Rachel Giesel is the one that had the questionnaire, but she has lots of other information on fiction writing. Helping Writers Become Authors is the one I told you about earlier, and it is very helpful. Once again, all of these websites, you have to sign up, give them your email, and then you can get whatever free thing they're offering. But I have found it worth it to go ahead and do that. Another one you will find a lot of great information on is Jerry Jenkins. Jerry Jenkins is the author of all the Left Behind series. It was very, very popular back in the 90s. He has written over like 200 books. He has a whole article on character development, and I have that link in your notes. It is a very, very helpful article on character development. And so that I also highly recommend. Once again, it's great to know a few great websites because we could easily study how to write so much that we never actually write. Ask me how I know. So it is important to take information and apply information. Take a little bit of what you learn and work it out. Then go back, get a little more information, and come back to the writing. So we're also always progressing in our skill as a writer, but we're progressing by applying it. Okay, so now we have about 15 minutes or however long. They want to allow us to do questions. I would love to answer your questions. And so just anybody wants to ask a question, I am happy to answer it. Did we have any questions that got typed in?
There weren't any in the chat, and if you don't want to ask it out loud, you can put it in the chat and I can read it for you as well.
So think through anything we've talked about today. And if you have a particular character that you're struggling with that you're trying to write, or you have one that you know is coming up you're going to be writing about, feel free to banner it around and let's talk about it. Anybody? What do y'all find the most difficult about writing characters? Or in your, if you haven't started yet, that you think would be the hardest part? I know it's odd in this electronic situation, but feel free to share. It's a little different than if we were in a classroom. We could have a free flow of ideas, but if we talk about it a little bit here, it's going to be really, really powerful in what we're able to apply what we've just been talking about. Does anybody have a question or a thought?
I think Sharon was trying to ask a question there, but I'm not sure. We can't hear you, Sharon. Could you type it in the chat? Down at the very bottom of your screen, there's a little bubble. If you move your cursor down to the bottom, it says chat. You see participants, chat.
Okay, so I see one that's been chatted in from Julie. I have not started writing, but I think making dialogue authentic is difficult, I'm assuming, Julie. And any ideas? And yes, making dialogue authentic is difficult because it has to be authentic, but without all the filler we normally have in our dialogue. Sometimes you just have to start writing. Put your two characters in the room together and just start writing. Hey, what do you think about this? And then hit return and the other character answers, and you just banter back and forth. If you find it difficult in the typing part, then do it and record it out loud. I have found if I can talk it out, it's often helpful. Sometimes I'll just talk it out by myself, thinking through, he says this, she says that, and then I'll go down and write because I have more of that flow, because dialogue happens much faster than our fingers type. But you also could record it and then type it out, and that can get you going on dialogue. Dialogue is a practice, and so you want to just keep going. Dialogue is a great place to reveal character because we all have our little quirks in how we talk, and so you can reveal it through dialogue, but sometimes you just need to get the words out there. I would say here's one of the best things about dialogue too is just have them start having a conversation and don't worry about if it's ever going to be in the book. And then you'll get around to the subjects that will be in the book. And that is very, very helpful. Okay, so for Macias, people could be so complex that I find it hard to be able to become the reasonable reaction of a character in a certain situation and be consistent with his or her personality. I think that's a great point. We don't want to make them so complex that we can't keep up with their complexity. That's why it's nice to have, like, if you have somebody maybe that's super sensitive to being criticized, you know, you don't have to go into all the complexities of that for that to show up repeatedly through the story. So yes, we want to know who they are. And that's why, actually, Rocio, that I think that's why when I look at those questionnaires, I kind of pick and choose the questions I want to answer, because you can get down in the weeds to where it gets confusing. And you think, how am I ever going to put all this in the story? And you may not need to ever put it on the story. So when you answer those questions, it can help you come up with the characteristics you do want to use in the story. Highlight those and keep up with those. But you don't have to keep up with everything. Okay, from Sharon. I find it difficult and by the way, if I answer your question and you think, well, that didn't really answer my question, please type another question in and I'll try to do better next time. Okay, Sharon, I find it difficult to create a character from nothing. I usually base it on someone I know, but then I change some things about them. Absolutely, Sharon. In my book that I am writing, one of the characters is very much based on my grandmother. And it's not exactly my grandmother at all. I don't know that anybody reading it who knew my grandmother would say that was her, but that's who I'm thinking of. And it's a great trick for if you're just having trouble going, I don't know, it's too many things to think about. Base your character on someone you know, and then change enough that they would never know it's them. But it helps you think about maybe cadences of speech or the way they walk, how they react to a situation, what they do with their eyes. Do they mask their emotions, or can you tell whatever they're thinking by the way their face looks? Think about those quirks of a personality and get your character based on one of them. And then you might find that gives you a starting point from which then you can develop further. Maybe change some of the backstory, maybe change some of the quirks, something you need them to do to make the story work. But that's a very, very helpful suggestion, Sharon. Thank you for that. Anybody else have another question, a great suggestion like that, or something else that you have seen work or find difficult?
The book I have in me is kind of based on life experiences, and some of them are kind of really weird and funny.
Mm-hmm.
You know, life is stranger than fiction, but how do you make, when you write, how do you make things that are really kind of crazy sound not, you know, way out of there? Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
I do. You know, I think it's just picking and choosing the details that really matter. If something would tend to be more distracting than helpful to explain,
Yes.
then you might edit through the details and only put the ones that are really important. Because we cannot tell everything. We can't. We leave a lot up to our readers' imagination. They fill in a lot of the blanks. Notice that as you're reading a story, and you might try to find a story that has some kind of out there kind of stuff, and how did they succeed at telling it but keeping it grounded? Is we have to just include the details that matter enough to paint the picture. And so, you know, maybe it's grounding your characters and that they talk in a very realistic way. It's being very careful what you choose. And then I would also suggest on a story like that, which is harder to write, is that you have a good group around you that is reading and giving you feedback to say, you know, either, wow, this is fantastic, or I have no idea what's going on and I'm kind of freaked out. So that might help. Does that help you?
I think so, yeah. You know, trouble is, life is stranger than fiction.
It is. It is. And even saying things like that,
Yeah.
I think it also helps to say, I know this seems so crazy, but this actually happened. You know, it's okay to have that conversation as you're writing. It makes it, it's not like you're going, hey, this is normal. You can say, you know, I couldn't even believe it, and it was happening to me. And then that way it lets people know that are reading, wow, okay, I'm not far off that this is different. And that could help too.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Anybody else? You know, I do want to encourage you, if you're writing a story that's sort of an adventure that has a well-formulated antagonist, that's a person that is getting in there and being in the way, it's very important that we develop our antagonist as not just the big black boogeyman. And by black, I mean dressed in black. I'm just talking about that he cannot just have the dark hat and then the nice guy have the white hat. You know, the antagonist needs to have his own history. He needs, or she needs to have what's gotten him to the place of being this broken and this evil. there's actually something good about him somewhere. Because unless you're talking about something that's total fantasy and therefore you simply have a complete embodiment of evil, all of people that are even the ones that are doing the wrong thing have something inside of them that is not wrong, or a history that drove them there. We make our stories much deeper and much more meaningful when we develop our antagonist with as much detail as our protagonist. So that's just a hint. Judy, do you have anything? I know you are the writing expert as well. So what else do you have that you would say about all this?
Oh, you've done a great job, Susan. Great job. But like you know, I've worked on several novels, but I haven't completed one. Mine are mostly memoirs. But if any of you are thinking of doing a memoir, and I think Sharon had a memoir years ago, right, Sharon? Even in writing memoir, you have to develop your characters, because you may know your father, you may know your mother inside out, or your siblings, but your reader won't know them. So you still have to develop that character in the person so that your reader can enjoy the read. So, yeah. But great job, Susan.
Oh, well, thank you. That is a great point, Judy. You know, when we talk about character development, obviously its first application is in fiction, but that is not its only application. When you are writing a nonfiction, but you have illustration and it has people in it, you now have characters. A memoir is all characters. It's a story. It is chosen parts of a story, but you want to develop those people in the story with their layers. Even those who were hurtful in the past probably have something redeeming about them, and we want to bring in those layers. Okay, so Julie said, I listened to the Stephen King book on writing you suggested. I think it is very helpful. Oh, good. I'm so glad, Julie. I love On Writing. It is a great memoir. I don't read a single thing that Stephen King writes that's scary, because I just don't choose that. But I like to feel good at the end of my reading, even if it's suspenseful. I don't like freaky, but I love his book on writing. So helpful, and it just helps in that realizing the process of writing. I would really encourage you just to get out there when you have characters in your head. A lot of times we spend a lot of time with these characters in our head. Put them in a story and start writing, even if you're not sure how it's all going to turn out, because you'll find that the characters will develop and the story will develop as you get them going. As you put them on the quest and roll them down the road, it might take a turn you weren't expecting, but you can get the quest going and completed if we start writing and not just think about the writing. So, and like Julie did with reading that book on writing, it's a great thing to find really good craft books about writing fiction, about writing character. There's a lot of good books on writing dialogue. All of those questions, we can do some research and we can find out about them. Last week, I suggested a book by James Scott Bell. He has a very highly recommended book on writing dialogue. That's not super long. You can even get it on Kindle, so it's not quite as expensive. And that can really, really help create the rhythm. It's a rhythm. Dialogue you want it to flow. You want it to draw the reader along in the story. And so that takes practice. I'm still figuring that one out. But yeah, very good. I'm glad you enjoyed that, Julie.